Tanse, good afternoon. I'm Creeson Agecoutay. Welcome to APTN National News. Today marks 5 years since the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report was released, along with 231 calls for justice. It concluded the MMIWG crisis in Canada amounts to genocide and the systemic violence against Indigenous women and girls have faced and continue to live with in this country. A statement Prime Minister Justin Trudeau later accepted. The 231 calls for justice push for an overall reform of the status quo in 18 areas, including in education, justice, and health, all aimed at protecting Indigenous women and girls. The work needed to get done by the federal government has been slow, and so far Ottawa has committed to more than $2 billion to respond to the calls for justice. But advocates and Indigenous leaders say long-term and sustainable funding is still desperately needed. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak will be in studio to talk more about the MMIWG report and the calls to justice later in the show in about 13 minutes' time. An inmate is on the run after escaping from the minimum security Stan Daniels Healing Center in downtown Edmonton on Thursday. 31-year-old Callum Auger was serving a 6-year sentence for manslaughter. Auger is 5'7" in height and 122 pounds. An arrest warrant has been issued by the Edmonton police. Anyone with information on Auger's location is asked to contact police. Auger is the 4th inmate to escape from the healing center this year. Officials in Quebec have now confirmed that convicted serial killer Robert Pickton has died in hospital. The 74-year-old succumbed to his injuries after being attacked by another inmate at the Port Cartier Maximum Prison east of Quebec City. APTN's Tina House is in Vancouver and spoke with the family members of some of his victims.
Officials are finally confirming the death of Robert Pickton. Many are saying it's very ironic that the serial killer was murdered himself after murdering so many women. Joining me today are family members of some of his victims. Sarah DeVries. Sarah, can you tell me a little bit about your story and who is in the picture here?
So this is my mother. We share the same name, so she's Sarah DeVries Sr. She went missing in 1998 after my father's birthday. And I can just say with all confidence that her soul and her spirit is finally at peace.
Also joining us today is Michelle Pinot. Michelle, your beautiful daughter Stephanie Lane here is featured on your bag. Can you tell me a little bit about her story?
Yeah, Stephanie went missing in January of 1997. So for 6 years we didn't know where she was. It was just her birthday the other day. I was hoping that Pickton wouldn't pass on her birthday. That would have been the worst thing I could think of. But I'm good now. I'm good.
Hearing the news of his passing, has that given you a sense of justice?
Yes, it does, because we would have never got justice in Stephanie's case. So yes, I feel 1,000 tons lighter today.
Also joining us today is Palahelsia Lorelei Williams. Lorelei, who do you have in the photo here with you?
I have my cousin Tanya Holick. She went missing in 1996. She was my older, beautiful cousin who was a protector of us. And yeah.
And how are you feeling after hearing the words that Robert Pickton has died?
I am feeling overwhelmed with emotions. Like, it's very, very, I don't even know how to explain it. I never knew how this would feel, but it's some sort of justice for me. Yeah.
There's still so many questions yet to be answered. He self-proclaimed to have killed up to 49 women, was only convicted of 6, but was on trial for about 33. I mean, there is evidence that's about to be destroyed from the RCMP. Pickton himself implicated others. Sarah, how are you feeling now, and what would you like to happen next?
I would like to see the preservation of the evidence, and I'd like to see something more come from that. I'm just not quite sure what that looks like at this point.
Michelle, final words. What do you want to say about what happened today, and what would you like to see happen going forward?
Well, the evidence I think is very important. Myself, I think this is the only justice I'm going to get. So I am extremely, extremely happy today.
Lorelei, what would you like to see for next steps?
Next steps is to fight for that evidence to stay. That was why I said some sort of justice, because with him goes the evidence, and I'm going to fight for that evidence to be brought out.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll have much more on this story coming up on Monday. Back to you in studio.
To Winnipeg now, where a locally owned grocery store is under the spotlight for how staff handles shoplifting. A few weeks ago, an alleged assault on a First Nation woman inside the store made headlines. Since then, the owners say violence is on the rise against them. TR Wheatley has more, and a warning, some of the video in this story is disturbing.
Bring some frozen back ribs out, please.
For over 20 years, Munther Zeed's family have owned 5 food fair stores in Winnipeg. He's known around the city for his aggressive way of tackling shoplifting, especially at this location. Zeed says he's invested in over 36 security cameras here, and still, things are getting worse.
Walk me through this particular incident here.
Well, this happened last week, Friday. You will see 2 ladies walk up to cars. The white car is a cousin's car. The black car is my brother's. You will see them approach the car, smash the windows, spray some sort of a liquid into them, and then you're going to see a huge fireball. There we go. So I don't know if they got hurt from that. These 2 girls that came in the day before on Thursday, they were also escorted out for shoplifting. And the type of language they used is, you think you can do to us what you did to that lady a couple of weeks ago?
In that altercation last month, a staff member allegedly punched a First Nation woman who allegedly was caught shoplifting. Her son was jostled. That incident led to the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs pulling their Jordan's Principle food voucher program from Food Fair. Soon after, police were called to another incident. This time, 3 employees were taken to hospital with upper body injuries after a violent brawl with 5 teenagers. Zeed says they also mentioned the incident involving the mom and her son.
So they were told either shop or leave. They walked around. One tried to steal. We stopped them, escorted them out. They came back about an hour later, 5 guys, and as you can see, went crazy on my staff, especially one, and he's the one that escorted them out.
That same day, there was supposed to be a joint press conference with food fair owners and the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, but it was cancelled with no real explanation. Zeed would only say now that he continues to remain hopeful for a forthcoming announcement.
And I'm proud to say that I received a call today from the executive director of the AMC that we're going to be sitting down to talk about talking against violence, talking against shoplifting, how we can work together in preventing situations like this.
APTN reached out to Winnipeg Police to see if any charges have been laid in any of the 3 incidents to date. In an email response, they would only say the entirety of these incidents are being investigated by the Major Crimes Unit. As for the staff member involved in the first incident, Zeed says he is suspended pending police investigation. TR Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Last week, the Federal Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations was in Saskatoon to announce funding for the Canadian light source located at the University of Saskatchewan. The money is going towards incorporating Indigenous knowledge into modern science. Our video journalist Rachel May has more.
As I travel the country, I see many moments where Indigenous teachings, if they were used from the outset, would have had us in a much different place.
On Friday, it was announced by the Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Gary Anand-Asangari that $83 million will be given over 3 years to the Canadian Light Source to help further Indigenous research. The Canadian Light Source is a national research facility that produces the brightest light in the country, which scientists use in health, environment, and agriculture research.
So we do need to go back to Indigenous knowledge. That is where traditional knowledge really has medicinal value. It can compete with science in every way.
Canadian Light Source is working on projects that bridge the gap between Indigenous teachings and modern science. Dallas Pelly is part of the education team at the Canadian Light Source and says tour groups have already seen how Indigenous teachings are being incorporated firsthand.
We've actually had Indigenous students from Carry the Kettle come and they brought bison hair as an example, and they put the bison hair in the beam line, and they were able to examine the chemical composition of that hair.
In addition to the funding to the Canadian Light Source, an additional $30 million is being donated to the International Vaccine Centre at the University of Saskatchewan. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
When we return, the AFN National Chief is in studio to talk about the MMIWG report and the calls for justice. That interview in about 3 minutes' time. Stick around. Welcome back. It has now been 5 years since the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls released its final report and 231 calls for justice it contains. Since then, impacted families and Indigenous leaders have criticized the federal government for not acting fast enough to put those calls into action, and in most cases giving them a failing grade each year. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak is among this in chorus. She joins us now to talk more about the anniversary of the MMIWG report. National Chief Woodhouse-Nepenak, thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule and joining us in studio today.
Miigwech for having me.
Are you satisfied on where Canada is on this file? Back when the pandemic hit, I remember the federal government coming out and saying, blaming the pandemic for reasons in terms of why they weren't getting this file moved quickly enough.
Oh, I think that's unacceptable. I think that we haven't moved this file as quickly as we should have. They've only moved on two pieces of this that have been completed, and most have not been actioned or very minimal action, and I think that that's very unacceptable.
Out of these calls to justice, what do you think are the most pressing that need to be addressed now at this very instant?
Well, I think policing and public safety. I think that in First Nations there's so many gaps when it comes to policing. There's always this pushback. We're having that conversation right now nationally where it's a very tough conversation because the provinces want to hold on to that control but yet not put the resource into First Nations communities to make sure that we're safe and secure. And on top of that, we've always had a very difficult relationship, as you know, with the RCMP over, since the creation of Canada. And so when we're trying to push for First Nations to take control of policing and public safety in their communities, it's always a pushback. And we're going to continue to move forward. I know I will be meeting the public safety minister next week yet again, and we'll continue to do that, but it's always such a push and pull. One step forward and 2 steps back.
On the accountability piece for police, RCMP, and all these jurisdictional police, what stands out for you there?
I think at the moment it's very disheartening to see, and people see it in the media. People see, I know that you have been speaking about that many times in the past few months, but it's the RCMP even trying to bring back or get rid of the Pickton evidence that happened in BC. And I think that's very disheartening. So I know the Assembly of First Nations, we've written a letter this week to the Justice Minister, the Minister responsible for public safety, Dominic LeBlanc, the Premier. We shouldn't have to do that, but there's these families calling for, the evidence to be kept, and the RCMP who are pushing to have it all destroyed. That's not a good way to try move beyond this, and that's not a good way for families that are hurting to re-victimize people.
What do you think the federal government needs to do here to expedite the process and get these calls for justice moved?
Well, I think that they should begin to work with First Nations communities, implement the calls. They're set out, the report is done, and it's putting action to all of these. There's 231 calls, 229 are not being implemented. Pick one and get working with it. And I think that it's got to be a whole of government approach. It can't be one little department over here. It has to be a whole of government approach. And the provinces and territories need to also step up. They can't just say, that's a First Nations problem, that's a federal problem. That mentality has to end. And I think
for industries even out there to make sure that you're creating safe workspaces for First Nations people and women, and making sure that you implement good workspace, right? And making sure that on your boards and in your senior levels that Indigenous people are filling those to change the culture of this country. It's going to take all of us, and we call on Canadians to stand with us on these calls for justice, and we thank many of them that have been with us to support that work, that have stood with families that have been through horrific times in their lives, and we see them and we recognize that in a good way, but I know that we have a long way to go.
Really briefly, what are you most proud of that did get done out of these calls for justice since 2019 over these 5 years?
I can't say I'm proud of anything, because it's like it's 231 calls, and if we're this slow, how can I sit here and commend this government if we're this slow? Yes, I'm glad the report got done. Yes, I'm glad the commissioners came together and pulled all this reporting together. And I can't imagine how they feel, because it would be very traumatizing to hear all of the stories that our people have been through. But to sit here and say that I'm proud of one thing over another, I can't at this moment. And I always try to be balanced. I always try to think fairly on, government side. First Nation should try and find that middle ground. I can't even on this.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. National Chief Woodhouse Nipanak, I thank you for your time, for coming into the studio and talking to us today.
Thank you.
Indigenous fashion designers from across Turtle Island took to Toronto by storm recently. We'll tell you all about that when we come back. On the East Coast, St. John's 9, Charlottetown 13 with a little bit of sun. Nujawak 5, La Grande River 20. Quebec City 25, Val d'Or 22. Peterborough 18, Sarnia 18. Sioux Lookout 14, Timmins 24. Churchill 0, God's Lake 16 with sun. Winnipeg 16, Barons River 17. Saskatoon 15, Estevan 17 as well. Stony Rapids 5, Buffalo Narrows 11. Rainy in Fort McMurray at 7. Peace River 10. Calgary 14, sunny and 13 in Edmonton. Sunny at 11 in Vancouver, Kamloops 11 as well. Fort Nelson 10, Dease Lake 8. Beaver Creek 14, Whitehorse 9 in rain. Yellowknife 7, Norman Wells 14. Colville Lake 9, Inuvik 2. Baker Lake 0, Chesterfield -1. Arctic Bay 1, Resolute -1. Indigenous History Month is underway, and that marks the start of a new project on APTN News Online. Each day will feature a poem from a First Nation, Inuk, and Métis poet online and TV. January Rogers is Mohawk Tuscarora, living in Six Nations of the Grand River Territory in Ontario. Her submission for Indigenous History Month, the anthology poem series, was written during her holidays for her 61st birthday earlier this year. Here's January reading her poem titled Precious Human Interactions.
Precious human interactions. Even steam engines passing through are themselves sovereign spaces, with station and domain and most definitely holding protocol. People of transience claim they too have rules without roots, moving from here to there. What does it take to come to terms and bear witness? One must maintain a casual yet alert confidence. God bless, suggested in passing, a finger kiss blown in exchange. This is human interaction, as deep and authentic as the mighty Atlantic. We are all in a boat in the middle of nowhere. How does it feel to be landless? Forget the coordinates. You are in the right place wherever you are. Just mind your manners. Acknowledge yourself. I acknowledge we are gathered here, nowhere in particular, but in a place called time. And that time is called togetherness. True connectedness. a place we'll recall as memory. Make the memory with me. Make the memory good. The tiny cerebral in-between places where our visions get born is, you guessed it, territory 2. Love your thought babies. Name them, don't doubt them when inspiration brings them. Here, we have zero tolerance for neglected motivations. If you know what to do, then you must do it. The voices aren't going to hang around forever. They've got places to go and other doorbells to ring, so answer yours. We are boundless, beautiful turtles carrying etiquettes everywhere with us. Sharing by showing, not telling, just knowing we are here, helping each other with precious human interactions.
January Rogers setting the bar high. Thank you, January. The creative works of more than 100 artists are on display in Toronto for the Indigenous Fashion Arts Festival. It explores the deep connections between mainstream fashion art and traditional practice. Here's CTV's Donna Sound with more.
From the runway to the red carpet is the goal of the Indigenous Fashion Arts Festival, showcasing designers like Leslie Hampton, who has done just that for Lizzo, Lily Gladstone, Devery Jacobs, and Lainey Louie.
It's been really exciting to see the shift that the fashion industry has had towards Indigenous representation, towards size inclusivity.
The renowned Anishinaabe artist and designer from Temagami First Nation's newest collection is called Alkaline. Her contemporary fashions are sustainable, as clothing is one of the biggest contributors to environmental waste.
We also have a sense of sustainability within our work with supporting slow fashion. So we have low inventory numbers on hand to decrease wasteful overproduction, as well as we do custom work.
The four-day event not only showcases designers, but artisans from across Turtle Island, over 100 in all. It's the work of creative director and organizer Sage Paul to show the world that Indigenous fashion and art is second to none. This year's showcase is at the iconic Eaton Centre in Toronto.
Our team is primarily all Indigenous, so are bringing in so many skills from so many different nations, and we are really rooted in that love and care for our community, so we're able to hold each other up.
It's about representation and showing the world that Indigenous artists are taking their place in the world of fashion space.
Taking space, taking back space, and so it's not really a revitalization because we've always been here. It's us, it's like Indigenous people that are bubbling up and taking this space and holding it.
Fashion Resurgence workshops are also offered for creators to share their stories of survival, innovation, and pride.
To be able to showcase them in a major city like Toronto is so massive for Indigenous representation and the Indigenous economy as well.
The Indigenous Fashion Arts Festival goal is one that will bring these artists and their creations to the global stage on runways worldwide. Donna Sound, CTV News, Toronto.
And that's your midday newscast for Monday, June 3rd. Halfway through the year already. Hola. We want to congratulate Brittany Guillot with APTN Investigates over the weekend. She won the Canadian Association of Journalists Award for Human Rights with her story Inside Corrections, 2,180 Days. Great job, Brittany. We'll be back again for your afternoon national newscast. Until then, hai hai miigwech masicho. Thank you for watching.